Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artists Index and graciously supported by the fine folks at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And we're also grant funded by the Mass Cultural Commission, the Mass Cultural Council, I'm sorry. And as per usual, I'm going to have our next guest, our auspicious next guest, introduce themselves and spell their names. So take it away.
Hi, my name is Tom Short, and it's spelled Tomshort, just like it sounds.
So Tom is short for Tom. Anyway, I was just wondering, did you ever get any, grief about your last name?
Are you kidding me? A lifetime's worth.
It could be worse. I hope you have no brothers named Richard.
No, but that subject's been brought up too,
Yeah. There was a department store in Fairhaven named List Department Stores. That's where everybody went for their Levi jeans. And the unfortunate heir, his name was Richard, but I'll leave it there because I'm going down a path I shouldn't be going down. So you are a man of two minds, or many minds. You also a very early riser, that's for sure. And how do I know that? Because of your photographs. Could you tell us about your photographs first, and then we'll edge into your other lives?
Yes, sure. Well, I started, my love of photography started when I was a kid, and my dad had a dark room down in the basement. This would have been about mid 1960s, I guess, back in Flint, Michigan. And so I started taking pictures and actually had a paper route so I could afford a couple of cameras, and got myself a Yashica D and had a lot of fun with it, and processed my own photos and developed, photos in our little dark room. And then I went on and didn't really do much with it for years and years. Then I started taking pictures a few years ago when I was living. I took pictures all along, but not that many. And then, I had a nice camera. I used it for a while, then switched totally to the iPhone. Took pictures with that for a couple of years. I lived down in Westport after my divorce, and took a lot of great pictures out there, posted them, and I was really starting to enjoy it and get more creative with it. And then the iPhone just wasn't cutting it as a photographic tool anymore, mainly because I had seen so many pictures of the moon that I really admired, and I wanted to take more crisp pictures of the moon. So I ended up going back to my old camera, Panasonic, and took some pictures with that, and then that wasn't quite cutting it either. So I invested in an Olympus, which I've been really pleased with, and really went into it quite a bit more, studying through online videos and literature and magazines, everything that I could find, and going out and practicing, especially during COVID, which kind of brought this whole thing to fruition, as my music employment pretty much vaporized for over a year with that. So needing a creative outlet, I was doing some recording and stuff, but really needing a more creative outlet, I started taking pictures and learned how to process them on Lightroom, and really been working it ever since. I take mostly landscapes, but also macro and some portraits, and whatever appeals to me that looks like it'd be an interesting photo, I take it.
Let me tell you, some of those, early morning and late at night or early evening, which, however you want to look at it, sunrise, sunset, swiftly go the
Yeah,
years.
best times to photograph, as it turns out, for
Yeah,
multiple reasons.
yeah. And
Yeah,
this area was named by some, I don't know, prestigious magazine or whatever, as having this is one of the best spots in the United States for sunsets, is it?
I'm not surprised. They are pretty magnificent quite often. And of course, you can often shoot them over the water, which adds to that whole aspect. I take a lot of pictures right down the street from where I live in Fairhaven, which I have a view across the Acushnet River of St. Anthony's Church, which has kind of been a muse in that regard, but it's a really lovely little spot that I can shoot sunrises or sunsets rather over the church. And then there's just so many other spots in this area for moonshots and sunrises, sunsets, as well as just natural beauty, from Fort Phoenix to Mattapoisett. I've been down in Rhode Island quite a bit and shot down there. And also every once in a while I make a trip to New Hampshire and take some pictures up there too. So many possibilities, and still so many further possibilities to explore. I haven't been up the Maine coast. That's kind of next on my list.
Yeah, if you have a chance, go up to Scudic Bay. It's really phenomenal. It's like breathtaking. And there's a great little quirky restaurant called the Pickled Wrinkle. That's pretty cool to check out.
Okay.
Now you said in your neighborhood, so I've walked Sycamore Street a lot in Fairhaven and along the river, and it's kind of interesting how there are many people who have grown up around here and looked at the river but have never really seen it. And it's really it's really beautiful certain times of the day, and of course with the I believe St. Anthony's is a basilica church, so it's a little bit more prestigious than your average church.
Yes.
And the views from that part of Fairhaven are just absolutely incredible. Fort Phoenix obviously is another one. Along the bike trail on top of the dike, like around little Egypt Lane.
Egypt Lane, yeah.
It's like another world, like a hidden world.
It is, and you have Mary's Pond over there.
Mhm.
I believe it's Mary's Pond, where there's incredible amount of birds come through there, and I've taken some great pictures of great blue herons and various ducks, and swans are always down there. Very lovely spot.
Yeah, there's some serious birders down there, because I know that I don't know if they're all that way, but they seem gruff, but I think they're so concentrated. They don't want you to talk because they're looking for a certain bird to show up.
Yes.
And it's like, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me.
Uh-huh.
So you said a couple of interesting things. You're a Michiganite. So you know how to tell directions by using your hands.
I do, yeah.
Which a lot of people don't know what I just said, unless they're from Michigan.
Get out your map of Michigan. There it is.
Yeah, the mitten. Yeah, the mitten, the Michigan mitten. And I've been indoctrinated by marrying a Detroit woman, so I'm learning more and more Michigan things as I go along.
Right.
So when you said processing, well, two things. Going back to the iPhone, sometimes I'm outside with a dog, and there's a beautiful moon, and it's like I'm not even going to bother because the iPhone's not. It doesn't have any. The zoom is like totally inadequate, and obviously, I mean, it's probably the best thing, the best optics that you can get on the market, but it has its limitations.
Yes.
And the other thing too, you said processing. How processed are your? And then people get a little crazy with digital too. Oh, all this processing and light box and blah blah. Well, people used to do the same thing with film, because my very little photographic education, photo developing education, dodging and burning
For sure.
so really nothing has changed. I mean, you can alter a photograph, enhance it, accentuate the positive and,
Yeah,
downplay the
yeah.
negative, right? So how much do you do?
Well, it depends. Um, I don't really often alter colors except to like make them maybe more pronounced as to
Mhm.
what I would actually be seeing if I was viewing that particular sunset or whatever. Sometimes I go a little on the abstract side if that strikes my fancy at the moment. Um, I try to not crop too much. Um, try to shoot it correctly the first time so that you don't have to crop too much out. I'm getting better at that. Uh, and it depends on. I have certain tools that I use to give the picture more pixels or bring it into better focus after the fact. And there's a lot of different things you can do in Lightroom. I don't Photoshop, so I'm not flying in skies or even flying in the moon or anything like that, or flying in flocks of birds where there were no birds. I try to stay true to uh, what I actually saw. Um, so just colors and exposure, some cropping, um, sometimes more if I'm going for something that's obviously abstract. But when it is, I pretty much say so when I post something up. It's like, yeah, here's an abstract shot. So
Yeah. And it's something, I mean, I've known a lot of photographers, really good ones. One of them is a lifelong friend, John Robson, another Fairhaven
yeah,
artist.
I'm a friend of John's also. Yeah, he's great.
Uh, and I swear it's, the eye, everybody talks about the eye because, you can give 10 people $1 million camera, but that doesn't make them $1 million photographers. Probably one, if you're lucky, is going to do some mind-blowing shots. But I think a lot of it, I mean, it's the old, I think Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that success has nothing to do with luck. It's all about timing. And I really think, I mean, you can't, if you see something and you've got that camera in your hand, you just can't say, oh, wait a second. You got to shoot it. You got to start
Yeah.
shooting because it'll be gone, right?
Well, the light will change, so if the light is right at that particular moment, yeah, you got to shoot it right then. Uh, there's a lot of factors, if you're shooting waves, you have to time that right, certainly. Yesterday,
Yeah.
yesterday I was out in New Bedford Harbor, and I went out there to take pictures of the ospreys out there, which have returned to their nest. And I came around the corner, they were on the nest, and I didn't get a shot because I spooked them, which I was trying really to not do, but I did. So they lighted on Palmer's Light right there, and I took a few shots. None of them really were all that satisfactory. I might post a couple of them up, but they're such magnificent birds. But what happened while I was sitting there with my camera on my tripod, taking pictures of the birds, the ospreys on the lighthouse perched, their nest is maybe 100 feet away from the, if you're familiar with that, 100 feet away from the actual lighthouse. There's a stand, it's not very tall, maybe 8 feet tall, that their huge nest is on. And I photographed them last year all the way through when they were first there to mama sitting on the eggs, and then the babies were born, and their little wings sticking up every once in a while until they were flight ready and started bouncing on the nest. And I got a lot of great pictures. Anyway, yesterday while I was sitting there with my camera mounted on the tripod and my settings set to a certain thing for taking still photographs, a couple of crows came and also landed on the lighthouse, and they were just messing with the ospreys, and the ospreys were having none of that. So one of the crows flew down and decided he was going to get in the nest. and an aerial battle ensued. That was pretty amazing to watch, of this huge osprey chasing this little crow out of the nest and being right on its tail. I thought he was going to kill that crow, but the crow escaped and he flew back to the lighthouse. It was in the matter of maybe 10 seconds. So there was no time for me to take camera off of the tripod and follow that little incident.
Well, you need two cameras.
I know. I was telling myself the same thing. And I've seen people out there that have two cameras, and I was like, wow, that seems a lot to carry. But yeah, then you can have two different settings, be all ready to go.
Exactly. Yeah, I saw, I was getting the garden ready Saturday morning, and I heard this screaming. It wasn't screeching, it was screaming, and I thought, oh, a bird of prey has something, and whatever it is, it's, but I looked, I didn't see anything, and it was hard to identify, but it was a huge bird. The wingspan had to be somewhere near 3 feet or more. It had white discs under the wings. So I don't know if it was some sort of a hawk. I don't know if I'm not that well versed with ospreys. I know we do have one that zips by twice a day with something in its talons. That's its breakfast and its dinner.
Yeah, and they are white underneath, but most of the hawks, wow, there's such a wide variety, from red tails, goshawks, the list goes on and on, that are in this area. Some beautiful birds, some falcons, and some birds that are extremely fast. You see them occasionally. I know that where I live, there's a flock of pigeons that lives on the roof across the street. And when they're gone, you can pretty much count on there being a raptor in the area. So it's kind of cool. I also photographed a young bald eagle right in my neighborhood off of Main Street.
Yeah, there was one spotted. Our neighbors spotted one on their walk at Fort Phoenix 2 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
This one was just young. It was in a tree. And so I was driving home from shooting elsewhere, and I looked up and said, what the heck is that? And got out and took some pictures. And the guy whose house that the tree was in the backyard of came out and said, can I help you? And I said, well, I'm not taking pictures of your house, but look. Oh, and so he went and got his iPhone and took pictures too. But it's pretty cool. And there's a lot of them in this area. I guess a lot of raptors, because there's so many rabbits. There's absolutely tons of seagulls around. It's just amazing how many seagulls are down at the harbor right now. So I imagine that they also feed on the seagulls, but certainly on the rabbits and squirrels.
Yeah, we saw a turkey buzzard on Pleasant Street last week, feasting away on a roadkill squirrel. And the rabbits, they're leading for work on the weekends up north with our painting crew. We see whitetails everywhere, just boop, 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 on in the yards as we're driving down the street, heading towards the highway. Let me ask you a quick question, and then I want to transfer over to your other life. You may have more than one other ones, but we'll find out about that once we get past that.
None of them are secret though, Ron.
No, I know. And that is, it's either A, prior to the pandemic, we really weren't paying attention. B, something happened during the pandemic where the animals had the place to themselves, so to speak. And, it's just like they said, how air pollution dropped significantly during that span of time. I'm assuming the animals all of a sudden is like, hey, where the hell is everybody? Cool, we can go out,
Yeah.
So, there's that possibility. Or maybe the third possibility is there is something going on, could be related to climate change, that all of a sudden we have species numbers, and this all around the time when I think it may have been before the pandemic, when they said birds were falling out of the sky en masse. They couldn't figure out what was causing these mass kills. So Your thoughts? I mean, since you're like a frontline guy as far as the nature's concerned, seriously.
Well, I think pesticides, certainly like DDT, have come under control, and they were killing a lot of birds. The ospreys have seemed to make a magnificent comeback, and I suspect that that has something to do with chemical restrictions that are going on now. And of course, they feed on fish too, so maybe the fish are cleaner. I'm not sure, but there's probably less mercury pollution. I know in Michigan, that was a real problem in the Great Lakes. So the skies were certainly cleaner for a while, and maybe that helped. But there's always been these animals that are making inroads into urban areas. And so you see falcons, perched on buildings in New York City, and you see foxes all the time in Fairhaven, and I photographed a rather large coyote out at West Island a few weeks ago, and they're around too, and I've seen them in this neighborhood, and some big ones. People will tell you that they're not really coyotes, that they're coy wolves, and other people will deny that there is such a thing, but it's kind of a hybrid between wolves and coyotes. So they're bigger than the coyotes were a number of years ago, and probably a heck of a lot smarter too. So maybe that allows them to infiltrate into urban areas. But even deer, and certainly, as we said, more and more rabbits. So I think they're making these inroads. And of course, with COVID, it probably accelerated that process because people weren't out for a while. Not so much driving. It was kind of pleasant, you could drive places and there wasn't a million cars on the road with you all the time. So that was kind of good. So that probably accelerated that process because they weren't being killed by traffic. And now they're here, and I guess they figured it out and they're staying, I haven't seen a Fisher cat in a few years, but they're probably still around too.
We had one. I heard it first, and I thought, oh my God, that's the most horrible sound I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like an animal was being eviscerated, and then when I found out that it was actually a pleasurable activity that they were on, I was like, oh my God, they're really, really bawdy and rowdy. But yeah, I mean, just here alone, turkeys. I mean, entire
Oh yeah.
a bunch of turkeys, rafter, no, rasher. Anyway, I forgot what
might be a rafter.
of turkeys. Fox, saw a really big coyote on the bike trail. A family of ducks that crosses through our yards. Deer, possum. And then, so I'm thinking, okay, so if the prey, their population numbers are going up, then the predators obviously aren't starving. So it's, hey, we're in their place, and now tell your musical side.
That brings to mind one more thing, which is
What's
kind
that?
of a nice transition. A line by Tom Waits, who I'm a great admirer of, and have played a lot of his music actually. But a line from one of his tunes: "You can chase out nature with a pitchfork, but it always comes roaring back."
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. Does the music side go back to Flint?
Oh yeah. Most
Okay.
definitely. Even from very early age, actually, when I lived in the Detroit area, I lived in a suburb, Berkeley, Michigan, and I started taking piano lessons when I was maybe 6 years old in that area. So yeah, a very early age, I started in on the music, and I took piano lessons until I was in my teens. But in the meantime, My father got a position, teaching position at General Motors Institute in Flint. So we moved to Flint, where I continued taking piano lessons from various teachers, and got more interested in improvisational music. And then in high school, I was playing, well, in junior high, I was playing clarinet, and clarinet's a tough axe. And I didn't exactly fall in love with that, but it was supposed to be transitioning to the saxophone, which is what I did. But then I found myself really being interested in flute also. So I got a flute for Christmas while I was in high school, and really studied, started working on that, just self-taught. But when I became college age, and I started forming bands during that period too, when I was in high school. When I came to, and I was in the marching band and all the ensembles at the school. But when I came to a little bit later age, when I got to college age, first I went for some various things and tried, business out, and nothing was really clicking with me. So I decided to go into music at that point, and became more of a serious flutist, and graduated from the University of Michigan, Flint, with a degree in classical performance on the flute, as well as a history degree. So I actually studied a lot of the music history of Flint too, which was fascinating.
I mean, Michigan is, well, jazz, rock, and Motown.
Yeah, oh yeah.
There's a Facebook page, Flint, Michigan Music History, Michigan Music, historic Michigan music or whatever. It's phenomenal. Some of the biggest names in rock came out of, and actually Flint seems to be an
Oh, yeah.
epicenter. Obviously Motown in Detroit is its own thing. And then there's always been that underlying jazz history going on as well. So what made you move to Massachusetts? Because, this, as the more I learn about Michigan, it's amazing. There is a connection between both.
Oh yeah,
both states.
there is, and there's actually quite a connection between Flint, Michigan, and New Bedford. There's a Crapo Street in New Bedford and a Crapo Street in Flint, named after the same person.
That's right. The governor, one of the governors of Michigan, was a New Bedford boy, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was that connection. And I had a friend from high school, and he was in one of my first bands. He's or was up until recently, the head of the music department out at Tabor Academy. And he was, I'd heard about Massachusetts and the arts lottery and a lot of appealing things, and the ocean, and things were not going very well after I graduated from college in Flint. There was a real downturn in the economy there. It's a very rough town in a lot of ways. So a lot of crime and stuff that seemed to be accelerated by that. And my job prospects were kind of shrinking. So it was time to move, So I took a chance and moved out to New Bedford. And that was some 30 some years ago. And I fell in love with the area. It took me a long time to meet people and get established as a musician. In the meantime, I had experience prior to that, being a small boat sailor in Michigan, and having been involved in that business in Michigan also, I had some experience at boat sales and boat repairs and rigging, small time, but certainly wouldn't compare myself to a East Coast rigger. But I did have some knowledge. So in the meantime, before I got myself established as a musician, I worked in the boating industry and sold boats at the Boston boat shows at the World Trade Center there, and worked for a company in Mattapoisett, and learned how to paint bottoms and do all that stuff. So I worked at that for a few years too.
You have to also learn how to talk.
Yeah. It was amazing to me when I first moved out here, these accents. Going down to the skipper to get some pizza. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, my poor suffering wife. Even even to this day, she's like, "What'd you just say?" Or "What is that?"
Yeah.
It's like, "How about a chow mein sandwich?" No.
Well, you get a lot of grief, when you say Worcester, and
Yeah.
even some of the local ones, Fairhaven. Well, it's
Yeah.
Fairhaven.
Fairhaven. Yeah. My
Fairhaven.
her my sister-in-law, when she came to visit us, she boned up on all the names of Massachusetts towns so she wouldn't feel inadequate. Like, how does Haverhill turn into Haverhill?
There's a lot of them, and
Yeah.
it's funny that there's a New Bedford accent. And when I moved here 30 some years ago, it was even more pronounced, really. There's a New Bedford accent, a Fairhaven accent, a Mattapoisett accent, a Marion accent, and these communities would have been
And the
like
Fall
vastly
River,
different.
or I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
Fall River.
Fall River.
Yeah, New Bedford, you
Yeah.
know.
So tell us about Pumpkinhead Ted.
Well, that's a saga. So, I lived downtown for a while in New Bedford too, while I was transitioning from the boat industry and getting more into music. I was always into music, but I lived across the street from a bar called Crickets that was downtown. And I went in there one night, and the guys knew me and knew that I was a musician. And somebody bailed on them this was like a Wednesday or something. And, oh, our guy for Friday has bailed on us, canceled. So we want you to come in and do whatever you can do. I'm like, well, I'm kind of playing solo flute at the moment, so that's not going to quite cut it. But I had a friend, Johnny Neiman, and Swain School person, painter, very good painter, actually, in my estimation, and a really good musician, really good drummer, guitar player, very good feel for stuff. So I called up Johnny and said, "You want to do this gig with me downtown?" And we had maybe 5 songs between us. And we went down there and played our 5 songs. I don't know what we did. We made some stuff up, maybe just jammed out, played some blues. They really liked it. I don't know what we called it that first night. And they said, "Yeah, you're back next week." So we went back the next week. Okay, we come back the next week. And I think we were making up different names every time we went. It's kind of like the story of Jethro Tull, where he was just renaming his band every time until he hit on that one that stuck. So after a while, it evolved, and Matt Reichenbusch became the bass player in that. We had maybe a trio at that particular time. And so I was getting ready for the Friday night gig, and I was reading the Globe, and there was an article on the Kennedy brothers. And I look at the pictures, and there's Ted, and with his huge noggin. I'm like, wow, check him out. I don't know what that was, a hard drinking lifestyle or what, but he sure has a very large head. And then I flip the page, and there they all are as younger people. And there's Ted, and he's still got that, even at a young age, he's got that big noggin. And I said, wow, it's like a jack-o'-lantern, it's like a pumpkin. And it's like Pumpkinhead Ted. So I went down to the club that night, and I said, good evening, we're Pumpkinhead Ted. And that name stuck, and that was 20 some years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, he did have a big head. I bet him and worked with him a couple of times when I was representing the fishing industry through it was one of my advertising agency's clients, the New Bedford Seafood Co-op.
Oh,
And
okay.
really, and I thought I had a big cranium, but geez,
Yeah.
you just never know. Now, crickets. I remember the two gentlemen. Um, One was tall and thin, the other one was not. And they showed me there was a speakeasy located in the building upstate. Well, it was the Bancroft Hotel, I think it was, or something similar to that.
Mm.
There was, and then they had darts going as well, correct?
Yeah. Thus the
Now,
name crickets, which is, a dart thing.
I never knew that. Now, I believe there was a bartender there named Paula.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, Paula Daigle. She lives in Spain now.
Oh, wow.
She's a farmer in Spain. She is my friend Michael and his wife Terry's daughter. When we got to know them when they lived on Clinton Street, when we lived on Clinton Street, or I lived on Clinton Street, I moved out. And she said that Stephen King was in the city more often than you would imagine. Very, unpretentious, but it was Stephen King, and he hung out at crickets. Have you heard of that? Can you verify that?
No, I have not heard of that. I heard that Mark Farner was there one night from
Who?
Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hometown Michigander, actually.
Yeah. TNUC, I'm your captain. Yeah. All of a sudden it's all flooding back. Yeah.
So I didn't meet him there, but I never heard the Stephen King connection. I did meet another famous musician there. Johnny had run into this guy over at Freestones, and the guy said he was a violin player, and Johnny said, "Oh, come and check," or Johnny Neiman said, "Come and check out our band tonight. We're over across the street over here." And so he came in and said he was a violin player, and me, I'm like, "Oh, well, you want to play something?" "Oh, I don't have my violin." And so there was a violin player that had been sitting in with us named Rochelle. And I said, "Well, maybe Rochelle will let you play her violin." I said, "Rochelle, can this guy play your violin?" And she's like, "That's Johnny Cunningham."
Oh, wow.
And it was Johnny Cunningham.
Yeah.
And so Johnny Neiman and I were discussing this just a few nights ago when we were coming back from a gig in Falmouth. And so Johnny came up, whatever he was drinking, a whiskey and a cigarette. And those days you could still smoke in the bars. Me and Johnny, and we're like, "All right, play something on this tune." And we're playing along, and I cue him for a solo, and he hit that first note, and we were just like, "This guy is a real deal right here." And he certainly was international star.
Yeah. Could you explain to people who Johnny Cunningham is? Because a lot of people might be going, "Who?"
Yeah, they might be, but they should become acquainted with him. They may have even heard his music before, because he's composed so many things and wrote stuff for Riverdance and music in Spain, actually. But he's internationally known. He's played with so many people and recorded with so many people. But he had a band. He's was an extremely great violin or fiddle player, if you will. Some of his stuff is just amazing. And he had a band called Silly Wizard with his brother Phil. And I just watched a video the other day of Johnny playing with Phil, and the stuff that both of them are doing. But some of the stuff that Johnny was doing was just jaw-dropping. Beautiful tone, virtuosity. And I think I posted it, and I said on the post that casual virtuosity combined with brotherly shenanigans, because they were both kind of cutting up on each other,
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time just ripping through stuff faster and faster. It's just amazing. So he came from Scotland, actually, obviously, he and his brother, and had a myriad of great stories, and played with us on and off when he was in town. He'd come and sit in with Pumpkinhead Ted, and he also played with us one year at the Apple Peach Festival in Acushnet, and we were about 5 minutes into the set, and one of the ovens for the peach pie or whatever blew a transformer, and so the power went down. So at the time, Matt Reichenbusch was playing bass, and he was playing stand-up bass, and so all of our instruments were acoustic. So I said, well, we can keep playing. And Johnny said, well, we should get down off the stage. So that's what we did. And we went right into the audience, and they kind of circled around us, and we played down within the audience. If you can imagine Johnny Cunningham sitting on the grass playing his violin and holding his violin while this toddler came up, and Johnny handed him the bow. So this little kid is bowing his violin. It was amazing. It was an amazing scene. And we carried it off and played, extra long, I guess, for the Apple Peach Festival. And Johnny later said in an interview, I think it was in Spain actually, that this was one of his best musical experiences, was that day at the Apple Peach Festival. But he played with us, and he also played with my other band, which is called the Dancing Dogs. And Johnny Neiman is still in the Dancing Dogs, and Joe Raposa. Matt was the bass player in that band too, Matt Reichenbusch. And at the time, Jim Robitaille was playing guitar, and Joe Raposo playing trumpet, and I was playing saxophone. Joe was playing keyboards. It's gone through some permutations, and now Felix Rentschler is the guitar player, and Tim Richmond is the bass player, and Eric Costa from Pearlie Baker Band fame is playing keyboards with us. We had our first gig a couple of weeks ago, or this past weekend, out at Grumpy's in Falmouth. We hadn't played together much since the onset of COVID. It was really our first live performance. But anyway, Johnny recorded with that band and helped produce one of our CDs. And he played on this fantastic solo on a tune that I wrote that had a kind of a weird time thing going on. But yeah, quite a character. And so that's my other band, the Dancing Dogs, which has recorded like 3 CDs and is still going. A lot of original music, some very creative stuff. And that band I had started years before with Joe and his brother, Joe Raposa, and his brother, John. And that band kind of faded out. And then I brought it back years later. We reformed with Jim Robitaille on the guitar, etc. And that really took off. And we were also playing downtown at Crickets, but we played a lot of festivals and up in New Hampshire, and at Grumpy's in Falmouth also, kind of a regional thing. And did a lot of stuff that was funded by the Council for the Arts kind of stuff.
I have a question for you. Johnny Cunningham, any association, affiliation, relationship with the Clancy brothers? Because Aoife was in town, and Aoife was in one of my drawing classes, but she didn't have the. It was a different creative endeavor, but she was in my drawing class. She hung out for a couple of classes.
I would venture to say that if they didn't know if they'd never played together, they would have certainly been aware of each other, being
right.
from, similar
from the Isles, yeah,
area, the British Isles, yeah. So I never was aware of any affiliation. Aoife sat in with my band once or twice also, but we were certainly friends. We kind of miss her around here,
Then there was Shenanigans. I know there was I think there was actually a club or a bar or whatever named Shenanigans, but there was actually a group named Shenanigans, and that's all I remember. Were they from around here originally, or?
As far as I know, if I really thought about it, I could name those. It was like a duo, actually. I might have seen them once or twice. They were quite good. Good singers. sorry, but the names won't come to me right now.
Right.
It's been quite a few years.
Now going down that path, and wow, I mean, I hit a main vein with you right here, and so guaranteed you're probably going to end up doing another podcast, probably with Jeff Angeley,
Oh yeah.
Angeley, who's going to be dealing with the folk stuff. That's more his bailiwick, because we have Scott Bishop coming on board doing indie music, and then we have Sean McCarthy doing punk rock.
Oh, nice.
So okay, now at some point in time we're looking to get a grant for jazz, but and of course we go all the way back to Paul Clayton, who was a headliner back in the in the days of when folk started rising in the 60s. But what I'm trying to get at is Howard Glasser was my calligraphy instructor for the foundation courses at what was then Southeastern Massachusetts University, SMU. And because of him, he brought in the English musical theater. He brought in the Eisteddfods, the Cayleys. And when he passed, unfortunately, it's as Adrian Teo, who was a former dean at what is now University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Adrian said that a lot of the great things that came out of that university were based on a personality, on a culture of personality. And is any of that heritage, that DNA, still left in this area?
I believe there is, maybe not as much. Some of those people like Truck, can't remember his last name right now. He passed away a year ago, 2 years ago. But I knew a lot of those people because I actually played down at Tri-Works one time with my friend Dean Souza, who was also in the early version of the Dancing Dogs.
And Tri-Works, you can't forget Maggie Pierce. So Maggie Pierce.
Yeah, Maggie. Yeah, that's who I was searching for. Yeah, definitely Maggie Pierce. Jeff Angeli was actually in Pumpkinhead Ted for more than a year and played a lot of gigs with us. So, I'm connected to him too. And we've been friends for a long time. As far as the folk thing goes, because Pumpkinhead Ted is kind of folksy in their own way too. And when it started out, there was no electronic instruments. It was just acoustic guitar. I guess the bass was electric, but washboard, and it was very, very simple setup. But yeah, that lingered through the Tri-Works days, in which a lot of those people played for that. Vic Witherspoon, still around. I played a couple times with him. Yeah, so some of those people are still around, but they're certainly getting up there with that original Tri-Works, Stedford kind of crowd.
Tony Barron, who was a major player in English music hall, English music hall music. I heard that he hung around here for a bit. I mean, he expatriated, I guess, or just got a visa for a bit. But at some point in time with this whole project, I've always been thinking about it from the painter side, because I'm a painter, about who begat whom, who was a student of who.
Right.
For example, I believe the founder of the art department, which became CVPA at SMU, which is now UMass Dartmouth, was Ed Tornieri, who was a clarinetist in the USO.
Oh, wow.
And who he was not in the bar fight. He was in a bar where a fight broke out and got his lip split. And he said, well, there goes my clarinet career. So he used his GI Bill to go into painting. One steady labor market into another one. He was a student of Hans Hofmann. Now, David Loeffler Smith, which is considered a god at Swain, he was a student of Hans Hofmann. So we have two schools related to one guy. And now as you're speaking, I'm saying somebody's really got to do a genealogy of the musicians in this area. It would probably be jaw-dropping, astounding. I mean, to geeky kind of people who get into that stuff, but it
Like
would
me
really,
too, Ron.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? It would probably be phenomenal because, you know, once, and this is something I brought up several times on this show, once the people who carry those memories in their head have gone, the people who passed on before them die again for the second and last time because
Mhm.
there's nobody to carry on their memories.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually friends with Sig Haynes. I'm sure you know that name.
Yeah.
I didn't know David Smith, but I was friends with his daughter Sarah when she was teaching out at Tabor Academy. And my now ex-father-in-law, Johan Gunderson, is also a guitar player and very kind of connected to that scene too. He ran Scandia Propeller down in the waterfront in Fairhaven.
Right, his son is running it now.
Yes, Johan. Yeah, Gunnar Johan.
Mhm. So we're going to start wrapping this up. Is there any rock that we have not turned over in your life? Because this has been, wow. You know,
Yeah, well, I would say in my early music days in Flint, I formed a band that was named after the little court that I lived on, which was called Sanford Place. And so buddies were coming over and jamming, and out of that we got the Sanford Place Quintet, and we played for years around Flint. And we're going to collaborating with the saxophone player, who's probably the only one of that original lineup that's still alive back in Flint. And we're going to come out with a CD, hopefully this year sometime, of tunes we recorded. The keyboard player's name was John Johnson in that band. So that was a whole new, a whole different musical aspect for me. That was a jazz band, but we won a contest down in Ann Arbor up against the big boys, these scruffy kids from Flint, and had some real musical successes and played some really neat stuff. So there's that. And as far as my music career in New Bedford, I would also add that I've been teaching at Symphony Music Shop, private lessons, flute, clarinet, and saxophone. I studied with Diamond Chetafante, well-known name around here, down in Rhode Island. And I've taught a few other music stores, and also conducted for the Acushnet Classical Ensemble, which was a youth orchestra that would meet at Fairhaven High School for many years. And I conducted the concert band for that, which was a great musical experience of my life doing that. Under Doreen Nelson was the leader of that situation. Rest in peace, Doreen. And I also teach at Our Sisters School in New Bedford, which is a middle school for underprivileged and at-risk girls. And I've been teaching music there for about 8 years. So that's been a big part of my musical career also, is teaching. And I think that Symphony Music Shop, now with Bob Williamson and Christine, but it used to be John Pandolfi and his wife ran that place. And that was a sustaining force in my life as far as music was concerned, allowed me to work as a musician and keep my music going and keep studying. So yeah, a big part of my music career has been supported by, and continues to be supported by, teaching also.
this has been absolutely wonderful. I really thank you for accepting our invitation to come onto the show. And I don't think I'm going to ask you any of the dumb Barbara Walters questions that I've asked other people. You know, if you had a magic
Go for it.
wand and if you were a tree. Okay. if you had the opportunity to do one thing over, what would it be? One do-over.
I think along those lines that at college age, I would have studied a lot more jazz because that became more of a focus. And I don't feel that I measure up to a lot of the jazz players around here who were, you know, playing in their college jazz bands and had the musical opportunities with the institutes of higher learning, such as Berklee School of Music in this area. And so I was mainly classically oriented when I was younger, and I think I would have studied more improvisational music and probably taken more courses in composition and arranging also. I'm really glad I moved out to New Bedford. It was kind of rough those first few years of loneliness and searching for employment, etc., working in the boat yard, laying on my back underneath a boat, scraping barnacles going, yeah, I got a degree in classical performance on the flute. But, hey, it made me more determined.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Once we get the artist index where it should be, and what does that mean? We're going to be incorporated as a 501c3, a nonprofit, more grant funding, more collaboration because of grant funding. So in other words, we'll have more than one host, more than me. And because there's just so much history to dig up, and you mentioned jazz, and for me, I'm not a jazz aficionado. I'm just totally amazed that that's such a deep mine shaft in this area.
Well, we spoke in the first part of this of the connection between Flint and New Bedford, but I actually did a music history when I was in college. I wrote my senior history paper on the music history of Flint and found out some very fascinating things about what a huge musical town that had been when it was wealthy, and all the different factories had their own concert bands and they were bringing in world-class teachers, on and on and on. And I interviewed a lot of the jazz musicians at the time. I had thought that had disappeared into the mists of time, that paper, because I didn't manage to get out here with that intact, certainly. But it's recently been brought to my attention that it's archived at the University of Michigan in Flint. So I might be able to get a hold of that too. And some jazz musicians extraordinaire that I interviewed for that, as well as some fascinating things about the dichotomy of the race situation in Flint in those days, and some really down and dirty basic facts about different nightclubs that people hung out in and stuff like that.
I mean, my connection to Flint is my wife's cousin is the judge who adjudicated the lead issue with the water. Yeah, federal judge Linda Parker. She's also the person who married us.
Oh wow! How about that?
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap this up. Tom, thanks so much. Hang in there for a minute. Well, folks, this wraps up another really fantastic, I hate calling them interviews, conversation on another In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artist Index. And this one in particular, and I didn't know until Tom started speaking, but this particular podcast, this is now 2 of 5. I have 3 more to go. This podcast is supported in part by a grant from the Fairhaven Cultural Council, a local agency, which is supported by the Mass Cultural Council, which is a state agency. And we're also graciously supported through donations from the fine folks at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And this is getting more and more exciting as we get what Jeff Watton and I started off as more of like a hobby, a great idea, and it's just really starting to catch some traction and some wind in our sails. And with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us. Be good, be safe, be kind, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.